Light. Without it, we're blind. The eyes can work, as already discussed this morning. All of the details and aspects and attributes and parts of the eye may be fully capable of function, but without light, no eye can truly operate. We can talk about how the light passes through the cornea, into the pupil and then lens, through the into the retina, through the various nerves that ultimately send the electric signal to the brain, allowing the brain to see the image of what's before us. Even if every aspect of this complex system is capable of function, as noted earlier today, without light, it's all for naught. Now, there are various ways that light may be prevented, that sight may be diminished. And having discussed those also, the point to be made is simply this: when we see blindness, we pity the people. We have a feeling of compassion, and we want to take action in order to help. The same ought to be said about spiritual blindness. One other thing noted this morning was the various ways that spiritual blindness comes into the picture. We can talk about tradition and worldliness. We can talk about the level of ignorance or short-sightedness. We can talk about hate, and we can talk about choice, all of those biblical ways that individuals become spiritually blind. Not only do we want to remedy it, we want to prevent it. When Jesus said, "You're the light of the world," He was speaking about being a light to every eye and every light being lit. As such, one of the things that we noted this morning was that lost eyes need to see the city on a hill. Lost eyes need to see God's people shining as that light from a distance. Those without the city looking and seeing a light that will lead them out of what we discussed this morning pertaining to traditions, pertaining to the worldliness and the ignorance, pertaining to the short-sightedness and hate, and yes, a light leading them out of the choices that they've made. Not only do those outside the city need the light, but when Jesus said, "You're the light of the world," a city that is set upon a hill cannot be hid, He followed that with, "Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it gives light to all that are in the house." And yes, we in the house need light as well. We need the light from each other. Even as we endeavor to shine, and shine we must, we need the light of others to help us do so. We discussed the fact that, yes, we help each other overcome traditions that can indeed creep into the minds of those within the church, whether that be from past beliefs they harbored prior to obeying the gospel, or perhaps from mistakes ingrained in them from those who had the best of intentions but the worst of applications. There are those traditions that have to be overcome. There's worldliness that is ever a threat. And yes, ignorance is always a danger. Yes, we need light in order to help one another overcome short-sightedness and the search for pleasure and the quest for the now that so often corresponds with such a view on life. We need the light that helps us come out of hate. And the greatest remedy for hate is love. The light of love being an ever-present feature of who God's people are. And even some of our own choices have to be overcome. Those ideas being conveyed, a brief summary as it is of what was investigated this morning, there is another classification of people, another group that needs to see the light of God's people. Now, in our previous studies, we've talked about how we shine and more specifics of that. We've talked about hindrances to us being the glow that we ought to be. Our focus here is on having a proper perspective of those who need light, but also a proper motivation as a result of a proper perspective. The lost outside the city need to see that city on a hill. The saved inside the house need to see the candle in the house. Jesus, on another occasion, mentioned another house and another candle used for another purpose. Luke 15. He has already given the illustration of the shepherd with 100 sheep and one went astray. He follows Luke 15:8 with What woman, if she have 10 pieces of silver and lose one, does not light a candle and search for it and seeks diligently until she finds it? Here's another light in another house with another purpose. This is not the soul outside of the city of God's people, nor is it one that's inside the house that's in a place of safety and a proper relationship. Here's one that, as this illustration goes, is lost in the house. Yes, not only do the saved need to see the candle in the house, but there are those who are lost, who have an affiliation with, familiarity of, a relationship among God's people, who need to see the candle in the house. These are those that have succumbed to their traditions. And perhaps they've let the traditions that they were taught before they obeyed the gospel, or maybe some skewed traditions they learned after the fact, come between them and truly following the Lord. These are those that have been overcome by worldliness. And a secular mindset, a carnal mentality, have resulted in them no longer living for the Lord, but living like the lost. These are those who are away perhaps because of ignorance that they propagated. Instead of truly desiring the sincere milk of the Word that they could grow thereby, there was some area where they had not learned and would not learn. Perhaps, as Peter would describe, they had a willful ignorance in some area. See 2 Peter chapter 3. Or perhaps it was an ignorance that they simply didn't realize was an ignorance. Short-sighted? Yes. Or then there's also those that have fallen away because of, as we mentioned this morning, hate. Their hate manifesting as anger toward one or more of God's people because they're convinced in their minds that that person did something wrong, and wrong may have been done, but it wasn't done by Christ. It wasn't done by God. And by turning their backs on the church, they've turned their back on the Lord. Hate manifesting either as anger or as apathy, or perhaps it's that hate that simply manifests as a grudge, refusal to forgive. And then there's the choices, their own choices that they've made. Their choices to enter into an area of iniquity in life, or their choices to put aside this standard of God's will because I'm just so big-hearted, I have to support so-and-so and such and this and that and them and those on this area. And so they find themselves becoming ever antagonistic toward the God of heaven, the Word He gave, the Son He sent, and the body of souls that He saved. They're lost. They know the gospel, they've obeyed it. They're lost. They know the church, they've been a part of it. They're lost. Now, we have to be careful not to make the mistake of saying, well, they know better, and when they come to themselves, they'll come back. There are those for whom that might be an accurate description. But for us to assume that that's the case with all would be a sad mistake. Luke 15, Jesus actually gave 3 different illustrations of something that was lost and was found. First was that lost sheep, then there's that lost piece of silver. Now, in considering that lost piece of silver, that coin, some thoughts that need to come to mind. When we talk about those that are lost, yet they have an affiliation with the house, they need light. And they need the kind of light that seeks them. This woman did not decide, well, I'll come across it one day. It'll turn up. Too often, a pew becomes empty, sporadically, gradually, and the mindset of, they'll come back, they'll turn up, can overrule our better impulses of, let's reach out. Let's take action. When the coin was missing, she didn't assume that she would come across it in the eventualities of the day. She lit a candle and she looked. She didn't wait until the next day when she would have some more sunlight. She lit a candle and she looked. There are those whose choices break our hearts, whose absence stirs our tears. There are those who need the light that seeks them. They need the light to come to them. Not only do they need us to be a seeking light, taking action, being proactive in our efforts, they need us also to be a sure light. Yes, there was the illustration of the lost son, Luke 15, beginning in verse 11. There was a certain man that had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. The younger son essentially says, Dad, I want my inheritance before you die. Go ahead and give it to me. And the father did. Not many days after, he gathered all together, took his journey to a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. Here the younger son has departed and wasted all that he had. When he had spent all, he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that land. He sent him into his field to feed swine. And he fain would have filled his belly with the husk the swine did eat, but no man gave unto him. And when he was come to himself, he said, I will arise and go to my father. How many hired servants in the house of my father have bread enough and to spare? I'll arise, I'll go to my father, and I'll say unto him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. Notice what was not described in the illustration. It was not, he went into the fields to feed swine, and he fain would have filled his belly with the husk the swine did eat, but as he looked up his eyes to the hills, his father came to retrieve him. No. In this particular instance, let there be no doubt the father had done all necessary in order to let the son know that home was a place he could be, to exhibit love. But yes, there are those that are away that, while they do not respond immediately to the exhibitions of kindness, concern, and care and compassion regarding their souls, when they come to themselves, when they eventually do, it's those exhibitions of kindness and concern and care and compassion. It's the memory of what was had and now is gone, what was enjoyed and now is no more. It's a memory of the relationship and the certainty and the security that causes them to say, I'm going home. I will arise and go to my father. And hopefully I can find him. Maybe he hasn't moved. I'll arise and go to my father. And I'll say to him, I've sinned against heaven and before thee. I'm no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. He arose. He went to his father. When he was yet a great way off, his father lifted up his eyes and saw him. Saw, the Greek word is heido. It carries this idea of a mental recognition. He knew him by sight. From a great way off, he knew his son's walk, his son's saunter, his son's posture. As diminished as his son would have been, as emaciated from lack of food, from fain filling his belly with the husk the swine did eat, as deteriorated as he was, the father recognized his son, ran, fell on his neck, and kissed him. The son knew where home was. The son knew that home would still be there. He wasn't certain of the full reception to be received. In fact, he wasn't hoping for a full reception. He was simply hoping for a low position. But one thing was sure, and that home would be a light. There are those that have left God's people. Some of them you once had the pleasure of being able to call best friend. Some of them maybe you still call mother or father, son or daughter, husband or wife. And they, in the far country of whatever choices they made, face the choice of continuing to diminish and struggle and suffer are coming back to a place of safety. Christians, here's a question. Can they be sure that it's a place of safety? Christians, here's a question. Can they be sure of a reception? Can they be sure, based on the way that they've seen us treat one another in the past, that they can look forward to some sort of reception in the future when they decide to return? The only way that we are a sure light for the wayward tomorrow is for us to be a sure light for the wayward today. How have they heard us discuss those that are lost in sin, those that have fallen away? What have they heard us say? How have they seen us behave toward those that would respond to the invitation? I do not have an all-seeing eye. Matter of fact, I've only got one good eye, and this one just fakes it until it makes it. I don't know all that's taking place. But I know from my finite human perspective, I love what I see every time a soul responds to the invitation here at Forest Hill. I'm thankful for the show of love that is outpoured from the teens all the way up to those who are edging the century mark. Are we all endeavoring to show that kind of concern for those that return today, so that those who leave tomorrow will be able to know tomorrow that there's a sure light when they return? The reception that the son received is astounding. In fact, the description given in Luke 15 is he ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Kata phileo, kata down, phileo to love. He loved him down. It's almost the image of the inertia of the father running to embrace his son. That it's an embrace that causes them both to be unable to stand. Is that the reception that can be expected? The lost need to see a seeking light, one that reaches for them. The lost that are affiliated with God's house need to see a sure light, one that welcomes them. And the lost that are affiliated with God's house need to see a saving light, one that knows exactly what our goal is. James would put it this way, James 5, beginning of verse 19. Brethren, if any one of you do err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he which converteth a sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death, and shall hide a multitude of sins. It's a rescue mission. It's a searchlight. It's a spotlight. It's a beacon. We realize the danger. We recognize the severity, which is all the more reason why we rejoice when they come home. While we join with Luke 15:10, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repenteth. We realize that we're not talking about someone who, well, he's mostly saved. There's no such thing. They're saved or they're lost. They're faithful or they're wayward. Yes, there are those that need patience. Yes, God knows more than we do. We cannot read every heart. At the same time, when it becomes evident that the soul is away, are we that seeking light? Are we a sure light? Are we the saving light? And are we a spiritual one? Galatians 6:1. Another passage so strongly connected with the idea of reaching for those that have fallen away. The Apostle Paul would say, Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. There's a selflessness here. There's a humility inherent and innate in the proper effort to restore those that have been overtaken in a fault. Who does Paul mean by ye which are spiritual? Well, if we back up into Galatians 5, Paul speaks of the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. He speaks of walking in the Spirit, not walking in the flesh. Who are the spiritual? They are those who manifest the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. Those are the personality traits. Those are the qualities that the wayward need to see. Not belligerence, not demeaning mindsets, not condescension, but love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. Yes, we must be faithful to God. No, there can be no compromise. Ye which are spiritual, restore such a one. The light that shines within this house is to be one that is absolutely a seeking light for those that find themselves out of sorts. It's to be a sure light so that those who find themselves away know that they can return. It's to be a saving light, not a browbeating one, but one with a very set goal. And it's to be a spiritual light. Now, let's add another thought to what we're considering. Because frequently it's the case that we know that we're to shine as lights, we know who we're supposed to be, but it can get in our heads that I'm not ready yet. It's at the beginning of Jesus' ministry when He says, you are the light of the world. He did not say one day you'll be the light of the world. He said, ye are the light of the world. That's present tense for people that needed to hear every word He was about to say in the Sermon on the Mount, and He's about to correct every aspect of their religion. But He said, you're the light of the world. Or you move forward in Matthew's account of the life of Christ. And upon arriving at Matthew 10, there are 12 individuals that Jesus has handpicked out of those who follow Him, and He's going to call them apostles. Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon Zelotes, Judas the brother of James, and Judas Iscariot. Jesus will give them power to heal the sick, to heal diseases, to cast out demons. They have power over disability, disease, demons, and according to Matthew 10:8, death. Because He will tell them, raise the dead. Yet when He sends them on their mission, Matthew 10, beginning in verse 5, He says, go, followed by the word not. Go not by the way of the Gentiles. Go not into any city of the Samaritans. Now, Jesus would be preaching among the Samaritans very soon, but here, go not to the way of the Gentiles or the city of the Samaritans, but you go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. If we're going to be the light we need to be, not only is it a matter of realizing that the lost need to see the city on the hill, the saved need to see the candle in the house, and the wayward need to see the candle in the house, but we need to see the commission that's in our hands. Paul would speak of, if our gospel be hid, it's hid to them that are lost, and whose eyes the God of this world has blinded, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ should shine unto them. Paul said we have a glorious gospel of Christ and a commission to share it. Now, while he was specifically discussing the commission given to the apostles, there's something to keep in mind. The one who told the apostles to go preach also told them, you teach the people you've taught to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you. No, not everyone that calls himself a Christian can claim to be an apostle. There are only 14 of those total when you count Judas and Paul, and then later Matthias. Our point here is this. We're not apostles, but there's much said about that their commission that applies to us. For instance, when we think about the commission in our hands, look at how Jesus commissioned them and what their limitations were at the different points of commission throughout His ministry. Start with the limited commission, Matthew 10. We call it the limited commission because He said you only go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Thus the limitations pertain to the scope. You only go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, not the Gentiles, not the Samaritans. But that's not really the only limitation they faced. It's going to be a number of months, if not a couple of years later, when Jesus will say, whom do men say that I am? You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, Matthew 16. And then immediately following that, we're going to Jerusalem. The Son of Man is going to be delivered to the chief priests, the scribes, the elders, and He'll be slain. Matthew 16:20 and following, Peter says, no, you won't. Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. Question. This is the same Peter that was among those apostles sent out the limited commission much earlier. Suppose someone comes to Peter and says, listen, this Messiah you're preaching, this good news of the kingdom you're declaring, how's it going to come to fruition? Peter, what's this Messiah going to do? How's he going to deliver Israel? Could Peter answer that question? Here's our point. When Jesus sent the apostles out on the limited commission, they didn't have all the answers. They didn't know everything. And yes, Jesus would promise them in Matthew 10 that when you are brought unto the councils and you're delivered up before the synagogues, the Lord will give you what to say. But that was an inspired defense, not a promise for inspired knowledge regarding every aspect of the plan that had yet to unfold. When Jesus sent the apostles on the limited commission, they were limited by far more than just range of preaching. They were limited by the knowledge that they had available, yet He sent them to preach. Add to that the fact that they were limited by their personalities. Peter was not exactly always the brightest, shiniest flower in the bouquet. Matter of fact, sometimes he was a lot closer to a thorn. You think about the fact that there was a dispute among the apostles. Throughout at least the last 6 months of Jesus' ministry, who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? They would ask. That's not the fruit of the Spirit working in them. That's not the personality of deity manifesting through these individuals that Jesus has sent with a commission. Yet He used them. They had limitations. They were limited in scope. They were limited by their personalities. They were limited in understanding. They also had some advantages. Yes, they had miraculous evidence, healing the sick, casting out devils. And they were promised an inspired defense, as noted earlier, Matthew 10:18. They had some advantages in their toolboxes. There were also expectations. The expectation was be messengers. Matthew 10, picking up at verse 7, as you go, you preach, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Expectation, you take the message. Expectation number 2, Matthew 10:8, you heal, you cleanse, you raise the dead, you cast out devils. Freely you received and freely give. You help people, you minister. The limited commission, the first commission Jesus really issues, commissions men limited not only by scope but by personality and understanding. Gives them the help they'll need to do the job that needs to be done while leaving some details that they're just going to have to say, I don't know. They're not going to have every answer, not yet. And when you think about the expectations, they were simply to be ministers and messengers. Move forward in the ministry of Christ, and this time we arrive at Luke chapter 10. Luke 10, after these things, Jesus sent out 70 other also. We might call this the expanded commission. 70 others being sent out 2 by 2, just like as were the apostles. And what Jesus has to say to them runs very parallel to what He had said to the apostles, except for these 70 are not apostles. They're just ministers being sent to go to the cities where Jesus is going, telling them that the kingdom is at hand. Limitations, they're limited in scope. They're only to go to those cities where Jesus is going. They're not to go to the Gentiles or elsewhere. Limitations, they have some personality challenges as well. And if that's not evident, then it can be seen later whenever they come back to Jesus and they say, hey, the demons are subject unto us through your name. And He has to put things into perspective for them. By the way, that would also be a reflection on their understanding. They don't have every answer. They do not know everything, yet He sent them. There were limitations. But those limitations did not prevent them from being involved in taking the light to those where they were going. Not only were there limitations, but yes, there were advantages. These He would also give miraculous capacity. If you think about the words of Luke 10:9, He says, you heal the sick that are therein. How are they going to heal the sick? He's given them the ability to do so. And when they return, Luke 10:17, the spirits are subject unto us through your name. He's given them the capacity to cast out the evil spirits as well. Yes, He gave them advantages, miraculous evidence, perhaps even an inspired defense, but they're not aided with an inspired explanation of Jesus' plans no more than were the apostles. And they have the same expectations. They are to be messengers. Luke 10:9, you say to them, the kingdom of heaven is come nigh unto you. Luke 10:9, you be ministers, you heal the sick. Limitations, advantages, and expectations. And He sent people that still had learning to do. There's another commission to be studied. It can be examined in Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, John 20, Acts chapter 1. Time will not allow us to investigate each of these, but consider some highlights, beginning with Matthew 28. All power is given unto me in heaven and on earth, He said. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you. We call this the Great Commission. Now consider what's great about it. There's still limitations, but the limitations do not pertain to scope. Go not into the way of the Gentiles, nor the cities of the Samaritans. No, go ye into all the world. He's removed the boundaries. But wait a minute, Jesus, we still have personality flaws. Well, we don't think He knows that. Lord, we don't have all the understanding. He understands. The apostles didn't have all the understanding either. In fact, they were in a situation where if they would exercise humility, there may be questions that they would be asked where they would have to say, I don't know. Christians, the healthiest thing for us to do is as soon as possible, start teaching others with a humility that's willing to say, I don't know, in answering some questions. If we think we have to have every answer, memorize every detail, have the rebuttal to every argument, as left field as some may be, what we do is we cripple ourselves. We set limitations that Jesus never set. When we consider the personality flaws of Peter, the limits of understanding possessed by the apostles, the ones that even after His resurrection came and said, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? They still didn't fully get it. Yet He commissions them, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you. We need to learn more, yes. We each need to continue growing, absolutely. But if we have it in our minds that there is X amount that we need to know before we can be a light, we may not understand what it means to be a light. It's His quintessential sermon, Matthew chapter 5. Early in His ministry, ye are the light of the world. He didn't wait and preach it in the last 2 weeks and tell His apostles, you're ready to graduate, now you're the light of the world. Ye are the light of the world. The lost need to see the light of the city on the hill. The saved need to see the light of that candle in the house. The wayward need to see the light of the candle in the house. And we, each of us, starting from the pulpit and moving outward, need to see the light of the commission in our hands. We sing a song, into our hands the gospel is given. Into our hands is given the light. And it's not a matter of achieving this diploma or that before we're ready to shine it, to show it and to share it. Once we know Him, and once we know humility, we're ready to go. We're ready to teach, and we're ready to continue learning. Every eye needs light. Something that can be added to that is every light needs to be lit. There was a song released in 1996 by the country artist Trace Adkins. Consider, if you will, the lyrics from heaven's perspective. I told you I'd leave the light on in case you ever wanted to come back home. You smiled and said you appreciate the gesture. I took your every word to heart. I can't stand us being apart. And just to show how much I really miss you, every light in the house is on. The backyard's bright as the crack of dawn. The front walk looks like runway lights. It's kind of like noon in the dead of night. Every light in the house is on. Just in case you ever do get tired of being gone, every light in the house is on. Is every light in our house glowing? I hope the answer is yes. But if the answer is no and it's time to become a light, why not respond to Christ? We've discussed repeatedly what that means, and if you still have questions about what it means to obey the gospel, we can sit down and study those details, face to face, open Bibles. But if you're ready to declare, I believe Jesus is the Son of God, you're ready to repent of sins, you've got a broken heart that wants a changed life, you're ready to be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins, we can take care of that in just a matter of minutes. If you're a child of God who's been living a life separated from what He would have you to be, you've lost sight of the commission in your hand and therefore lost sight of the candles in the house, maybe it's time to come home. Whatever the case may be, the invitation is extended, the light's shining, and it's waiting. Will you come to it while we stand and while we sing?